I can't talk into mic. If that's okay. Good evening. Welcome to our first TED-like event. We hope to make this an annual recurring event here at iLeads Encino. This came to us as we do parent universities every month, as most of the parents here are aware, and usually it ends up with me standing up here talking. And I thought, well, people are getting tired of hearing me speak, so let's find some other speakers. And then Mr. Jackson and I started Mr. Thompson, see, there I go again, Jackson. That's what happens when you have two last names. Mr. Thompson and I started talking about having a TED event here. And we started researching it. We reached out to TED, and they thought, well, this is too small a group, and it's too broad a subject. So we decided, well, we'll just do it ourselves. We don't need TED to sponsor it. We kind of do everything our own way anyhow. So welcome. I'm really excited about our lineup of speakers tonight. I am thrilled to not be one of them for once, and thrilled to pass on the mic to Mr. Thompson, who will be your host for the evening.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, YouTube. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am very honored to be part of a community that values children as people before instruments of fact collection or memorization. I am a 5th grade facilitator here at iLeads Encino, and I do care a whole lot about math and science, but they're not my primary motivation for showing up to work every single day here or somewhere else for that matter. And if they were, I would hope to work somewhere where I didn't have to write so many emails or have to listen to so many arguments about PE equipment. No, seriously, that's what's important. So, I choose to work at iLeads Encino because I believe that relationships are the foundation of meaningful learning. And I have the privilege of, I at least hope, that the impact I leave on my learners is with a meaningful relationship. And I have several of them with several people. I'll be right here, sorry. And you got it. They're all very creative, intelligent, compassionate individuals, and they also just happen to be 10 or 11 years old. We're here tonight to talk about whole child education. Whole child education can be defined in a variety of ways. Conventional education might consider this extracurricular activities, things like sports or arts to any capacity, social emotional learning. And this is within the mindset that you might have heard from Bloom's taxonomy or Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this is not a new way of thinking, and these are crucial and very valid points. This kind of goes with the idea of thinking that a child cannot learn to simplify a fraction or where would the quotation marks in a sentence go before they're feeling safe at school and before they're feeling cared for. And I believe in this wholeheartedly, but I also want to provide an additional perspective. And this is a perspective you've probably heard at every TED Talk you've ever seen or watched before. And that's that the world is moving at a very rapid pace. And this can be said for technology, this can be said for our social norms, and this can be said for politics. I'm hoping that by September, all of your kids' fidget spinners will be stuck in the attic. But I don't know, right? And that's what makes education right now so exciting, because we don't know what's going to happen. On the day they graduate, we might, in traditional education, to have trained them for jobs that no longer exist. And as adults, we need to adjust our mindset to being less career-oriented. We might not get to look forward to Friday anymore. We might not have Monday to complain about anymore. Instead of letting our time control our essence, we can let our essence control our time. And this is liberating, but we are not instruments of liberation. Right now, we are compliant. And so I would love to think that if we all lost our jobs today and we were still financially stable and we still had healthy relationships that we could be happy. I don't actually believe it in my heart. I think we'd find ourselves bored and stagnant, and we'd find ourselves lost. And this is why whole child education is so important right now. We don't know the world that will exist tomorrow. And this is why I bring you tonight that every piece of us makes us whole. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Our first speaker of the evening is going to be a professor that I had this year at California State University, Northridge. Her name is Janine Letford. She was the recipient for the 2012 Bravo Arts Educator Award. She was the Great American Teacher of the Year in 2010, and at Heart Vision Charter School, the Teacher of the Year in March of 2015. Please give her a warm welcome.
Now, my third grade teacher would be surprised that I would be up here right now, because it was in her class that I was officially identified as special education because of my speech impediment. And I remember walking down that long hallway to the speech therapy room, wondering why I was made like this, why I couldn't speak fluently. And my mother made a critical move the next year. She signed me up for band class. And after deciding which instrument I was going to play and having negotiations and frustrations with, those first 2 weeks of getting to know the instrument, it happened. I finally found my voice. There was no stutter, there was no stammer. There was just me with the ability to say, with my melodies, I am here. And I went on to become a teacher. Of course, you can hear I speech years of speech therapy. You'll kind of hear it every now and then, but I just did my first TEDx event last month at CSUN, and it's been a long journey. But that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate for arts education and arts integration. As he mentioned, the societies are changing. When my mother was in school, even when I was in school, it was the formula worked. And sadly, that's not the case now. And I just looked at the cover of my magazines, Entrepreneur, Inc., Fast Company, and I saw the faces on these magazines, and they're people who were celebrating for their creative literacy, their ability to innovate. So that's making me question, are we really giving our students the tools they need to live their best life? So I asked myself this question, what does this look like in an elementary classroom? Like he mentioned, I do teach at CSUN, but my primary job is K-5 music and arts integration. And that's where my love is, right? But so my youngest student is 4, my oldest student is 44. It's quite the whole week of developmental issues, right? And one thing that came to mind was when my second graders, they were reading Charlotte's Web. And instead of just having them read the book, I asked them to show me the relationship between Wilbur and Charlotte, the two main characters, through dance. Show me using energy and positioning and interactions with each other, the development of those two characters. And so you have something like this. Okay, this is the part of the story where Wilbur's really sad. So show me sadness. And there's a child over here trying to slump down. Like, you're not sad enough. Okay, move your, and it's really interesting to watch their perception or understanding of what sadness meant to Wilbur at that particular time in the story. And then I say, show me that same relationship on a canvas, using the power of colors, of positioning, of visual metaphors. Show me the interaction between these two characters in a different medium. There's your critical thinking. There's your problem solving. There's your creative literacy. The arts allow us to look at things from multiple perspectives. They give our kids the ability to really see like almost a diamond, the facets of a diamond. You're looking at one object, but you can get to it from many different ways. And also dealing with sad Wilbur, the arts also increase our capacity for empathy, which is a huge thing, especially in business. That's like the rage now, right? Entrepreneurship and empathy and knowing who your clients are. So with this allows my students to put themselves in the position of another, What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What is their position on life? This concept of empathy really came to the forefront when my fourth graders read a book called Crenshaw by Catherine Applegate. Have you guys ever heard of the one and only Ivan? Okay, so her book that just came out last year is called Crenshaw. And it's about this little boy who is going through a bout of homelessness with his family, and they end up living in a car for the second time now. And in order to cope with this struggle in his life, he brings back his imaginary friend called Crenshaw, who's this huge black cat. And so I asked my students, as they're reading the book, let's find a musical piece that you think could be the voice of Jackson, the main character. And there's a song that just came out. It's called Rise Up. And my students took the first verse that goes, "You're broken down and tired, living life on a merry-go-round," right? And I had them take that verse and say, okay, you're broken down and tired. What does that mean for Jackson? Find examples in the story. So they're taking these two unconnected works of art and diving deeper into the development of this character because of these two art pieces. And then to look at the second line of living life on a merry-go-round. Here we are, homeless again. But the main thing that I didn't expect was I had kids coming up to me saying, "Oh, Miss Ledford, I was driving in downtown LA and I saw tents." And immediately Jackson's story came to mind. That empathy was there. They have been in that situation because they rode through it with that character. And they ended up collecting tons of toiletries, and we just had a huge outreach. But even more than them just remotely doing it, because the teacher said so, they were like connected. That's what we want for our kids. So there's this great quote that I love from a film, Dead Poets Society, and it says, "Medicine, business, law, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But what are we staying alive for? Communication, collaboration, creativity, contribution. What are we staying alive for?" So it's our job as educators, parents, community members, and mentors to not only make sure our students are equipped with the tools and the strategies and the skills that they need to be effective in their professional arenas, but it's our job to make sure that they have the tools to live their best life. And that's really what I wanted to share and what was on my heart tonight, giving them the tools that includes the arts and creative thinking to live their best life. Thank you.
I was worried that story was about me, but thank you. Our next speaker is a marriage family therapist. They have co-authored 2 books, which include The Parent's Answer Book and When Nothing Makes Sense. And they are the designer of the Wheel of Emotions, which was used in the Conejo Valley School District. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Greg Steckler.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about a subject I think that is near and dear to my heart, and it's been weaving its way through my life for probably 5 decades. And when Mr. Thompson said, "Every piece of us makes us whole," as the theme, I really wasn't prepared for that. But when I started to think about it, I said, well, where was I first introduced into this concept? So this concept first appeared to me in the spring of 1969. As a young college student, it was my habit to get up early before the sun rose and go for a run around this nature trail that bordered my college. And usually what I would do, it was also my habit to pick a concept to concentrate on once I had kind of entered the zone and got to cruising speed. Found it useful. So one day I had picked this concept of the oneness of all things in the universe. That was my concept. So I start on my run, I'm off, I'm building up to cruising speed, and then right in the middle of my path, I see this. Next slide, please. A pine cone. Okay, so I said, what a beautiful symbol of wholeness. How synchronous, I thought. So I stopped and reached down to pick up that pine cone, and as usual, the unexpected happens. I picked it up, and rather than seeing wholeness, I was overwhelmed with the multiplicity, with the diversity. You see, every single needle on that pine cone was unique. And instantly I realized that every pine cone ever created and ever to be created would always be unique. I also happened to notice that the needles on the pine cone were not really separate. They really were connected to each other through the core of the pine cone. Okay? They were differentiated, but not separate. In that moment, what happened to me was then something miraculous. As soon as I realized that, all of the prejudice in me began to fade away. And along with that prejudice dissolving, also went this sense of disconnectedness or loneliness or alienation that had been part of my life. And in that moment, there was an experience of lightness and freedom that entered, along with a sense of love and connectedness to all things. So in that moment was the very first time that I had an intimate experience with the paradox of the one and the many. I began to have the beginning understanding of how each piece of us makes us whole. Flash forward 10 years. 10 years later, I'm now a therapist, and I'm working with other therapists and psychologists, helping to develop a theory of psychology that postulates that we're not just a wholeness, but rather we are a grouping of many subpersonalities or mini-personalities, as we called them. It was sort of a derivative of Carl Jung's theory on archetypes. And we postulated that each one of these little subpersonalities had their own thinking, feeling, and behavioral component. And we gave them funny names like the inner critic or the inner child or the hero or the victim or the saboteur or the saint, the pleaser, the rebel, all of that kind of stuff. And the idea was that if we could identify these parts and begin to work with them, we could create a larger consciousness of wholeness of who a person was. So through that experience, I realized that each of us personally is a pine cone. Okay? And I realized also that saying, as within, so without, began to make sense with me. As without, so within, as within, so without. Flash forward 10 more years. Now, I'm working in the school district, in the Canal Valley Unified School District, and I've designed and I'm implementing a social and emotional skills program there. And over 5 years, I had the glorious opportunity to work with thousands of children and their families. And I had the opportunity to visit hundreds of classrooms. And I discovered, which every teacher knows almost immediately, that every classroom has its own personality. Okay, and when you go from classroom to classroom to classroom, it's like meeting a new person and a new person and a new person and a new person, okay? And I realized that all of these personalities, these classrooms, also had many subpersonalities. And I realized that if I worked with some of the parts, some of the little subpersonalities, it began to change the entire personality of the classroom. Now, one of the classrooms I really fell in love with. Nazi, can we show another picture here? Yes. The teacher in this classroom was absolutely marvelous. She had a magnificent way. You can see all the minorities here in this classroom. We have a lot of kids with different skin colors, and we have different sizes, big and small. We have kids from different religious and cultural backgrounds there. We have kids who are, we have future Republicans and Democrats and all kinds of other new political figures. And you can see that we have highly gifted kids there and some special needs kids there. And there are obviously a lot of boys and girls, and some of the boys want to be girls and some of the girls want to be boys, so they're all making it work. But this teacher had a unique ability to take these minorities, and you know Mother Nature is always shifting over time. What is a minority and what is a majority? It just takes a few hundred years, and then, so we can't get too attached to anything here. But she had a wonderful ability to take all of these disparate parts and put them into a beautiful sense of wholeness. Well, I was so impressed with this teacher that I asked to take a picture of her. Next slide, please. So I did. There she is. You see, now I don't know if she was doing a lesson plan on Native American Indians that week, or she's obviously very spiritual, or you know, maybe a little flighty. But clearly a very creative teacher. Well, she liked me as well, and she had a little scrapbook of the visitors to her classroom, so she took a picture. She asked me to give a picture, so I took a selfie. Next slide, please. Well, actually, I don't think that's me. I think that's either one of the directors or principals of one of the schools that I worked with, or it may even be the director of this school. Kind of looks like her, I think, because I think she gets up early and goes to bed late, and obviously she sees everything, and she's a very wise person. And after talking to some of the staff here, I asked how was she to work with, and of course one of them said, well, she's a hoot. All right, you knew that was coming, right? Yeah. My wife begged me not to say that, so, okay. So let's flash forward then. I guess maybe I have an impulse problem. But speaking of problems, next slide. One day, this pine cone walked into my office. And I looked at this pine cone and I said, uh-oh, I think we have a problem. How am I going to fix this one? You see, so I ran through my list of professional names I can call you. So I said, what do we got here? ADD? OCD, ODD, BPD, maybe PTSD, or maybe it was an MFT or a PhD or an MD or a JD, or if it's an old pine cone, maybe it's ED. Okay, so we have over 300 names we can call you, and none of them are nice, okay? We don't have any terms for the warmth of your smile. We don't have any terms for the comfort of your embrace. We don't have any terms for your creative, artistic, or athletic abilities. We don't have any terms for the kindness in your heart or your sense of humor. So in our social sciences, we certainly have come out of the dark ages, but I'm not so sure that we've progressed much further than the semi-dark ages, you see. So we're working on it at some point. So as I'm looking at my client, trying to figure out what to do, I remembered a story, you may know this, of a Western holy man who wants to compare his spiritual experiences to others in the East. So he arranges a trip to a Zen monastery in Japan, and they're very gracious and happy to see him, and they get him settled in, and then they assemble the monks and they have a cup of tea. And when they serve him this tea, it's served in this ornately beautiful hand-carved wooden bowl that's trimmed out with precious metal and inlaid with semi-precious stones. And the holy man is looking at it and says, wow, this is beautiful. And then the Zen monk says to him, well, which part of this bowl do you think is the most beautiful? So the holy man lifted it up into the light and turned it around and looked at it, and he said, well, actually the space in the bowl is the most beautiful. He says, because it's a perfect balance between form and emptiness. And he said, and he went on to explain that the emptiness represented the activation, the initiation of the creative principle. And the form was the support for that. So obviously the other monks knew that, so they politely nodded and smiled. But when I came back to my patient, I realized the only thing that needed to be fixed was my attitude, you see. And so once I began to discover and look at the space, the emptiness, the empty parts of us, the incomplete parts of us, the parts of us that are unfulfilled, the parts that are incompetent and inadequate, that also became a piece of what makes us whole. So with that, my prejudice again began to drop away, and my enthusiasm returned. And I began to then join this client on a journey towards his personal fulfillment. Much later then, or not too long ago actually in my practice, this beautiful woman walked in, and I gotta tell you, I was really floored. Next slide, please. Here she is. Oh my God, when she walked in, I could hardly contain myself because she made it so easy for me to see how every single piece of her lined up in a magnificent way. I don't think you can look at this picture of how everything in creation is made and not think of some divine architect at work. No human made that pine cone. Mother Nature did. So I'm looking at that pine cone, and where I was dumbstruck by that first pine cone I saw, now I was awestruck by this one. And I was in love. And I had the deepest appreciation, the deepest kind of respect, admiration, and gratitude for the intelligent organizing principle that underlied all of creation. Okay. And as I'm looking at that, I thought, I think I've seen that design someplace before, and I'm not quite sure where I saw it. And then I found it. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, right there. You see? So I thought, oh my goodness, look at that. I said, now the thought came to me, as above, so below. So below, as above. Same way. And again, you can see that that empty space between the stars there, the science would just call that dark matter, dark because we can't see it, and matter because there's a powerful force there keeping everything together. So this, looking at these two pieces of, these two slides, these two aspects of both the smallest and the largest of what is offered to us, I was reminded of a poem that you probably all had the opportunity or were forced to read somewhere in high school or college. And that's a poem by John Yeats, who's an English poet back in the early 1800s. Next slide, please. And I love this poem. There's a line in this poem that has been with me for 40 plus, nearly 50 years, okay? And so John Keats here, again, he's looking at an urn. This is an ode to a Grecian urn. So it's a cup, it's a vase, you see, it's a bowl. It's another kind of container, and he's taken with the beauty of it. And as he contemplates this bowl, he says, when old age, this generation waste, means when you're no longer trending, when you're no longer relevant, when you're out of touch and not popular any longer, he says, thou shalt remain, which means he's saying that there's some eternal principle at work here. There is something that outlasts popularity. And also in the midst of other woes than ours, you see, it makes no difference what generation or when you're born. You see, it makes no difference whether your misery is a collective one, like politics or terrorism or global warming, or a personal misery like divorce or disease or disaster or disappointment, he says. He says, thou shalt remain a friend to man, okay? That means that it always has our back. It's always there for us. And to man means if you're a human being, you're a lucky piece of creation because you have the capacity to see and recognize that this creation has your back. And its main message, this eternal underlying organizing principle, exists. And it says the message to you is that beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. He doesn't say that they're part of this or part of that. He equates them. He says that is true. He says they're both of equal value. And in the context of our conversation about whole child education, he's saying to us the arts and the sciences are exactly the same. And anybody who has passionately pursued either of those fields ends up in the other field. So you cannot separate it. It is insane. It just doesn't make any sense to try to separate those. And then he says, well, that's all you know on earth and all you need to know. Well, he was truly a romantic. You see his heart up there? That's why we know he was a romantic English poet. Okay, so the thing I think I want to say is the next time you go for a walk around your neighborhood, or the next time you go for a hike in nature somewhere, or you're preparing a meal for some seasonal festivity, and if you come across one of these, next slide, last slide, Nazi, please. We're almost there. Let's see. Okay, if you come across one of these pine cones, okay, and if you're willing to truly take in the meaning that every piece of us makes us whole, or if you take in at a deeper level the understanding that we are a oneness and a manifoldness, then I can promise you three things. One, you will experience what I experienced, the disillusion of your prejudices, and that sense of lightness and freedom will return to you. And secondly, you will be filled with abundant joy, you and all the others around you. And along with that joy, you will experience, at least for a brief period of time, unconditional love. And third, maybe most importantly, you will once again feel whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I will never look at a pine cone the same way again. So we are not sponsored by TED tonight, but we do have a speaker named Ted. Ted Wakeman will be joined by Christy Durham and AJ Webster. They'll be doing a team talk. AJ Webster is together, they are the co-directors of Sycamore School, which is a school dedicated to engaging future-focused learning through games and projects. It is located in Malibu. Christy Durham has been a teacher for 20 years. She has a master's in educational leadership and in policy studies. AJ Webster has over 15 years as a teacher, a master's in educational leadership and in policy studies. He has worked with the Playmaker Studio School, which was featured in the PBS newsletter. Ted Wakeman has been in education for over 20 years, and he is the co-creator of Playmaker School as well. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hi, good evening. So I'm Christy Durham. This is Ted with 2Ds, Wakeman, and AJ Webster. And we are going to break one of, I think, the cardinal rules of a TED Talk. And we're not going to be just one speaker, but we're going to be 3 speakers. So if that gives you any sense of how we're running our school, we do break all of the rules. It's kind of a prerequisite of what we're all about. And we were super excited about this topic. We talk a lot about something that we like to call whole humans. Yes, whole children, but they're humans. And next slide. We really feel strongly that we want to support students' creativity, their emotional needs, their cognitive needs, and their physical needs, that it's all interconnected and super important, and that they're not bits and pieces that we add on to education, but rather you change the entire system to serve students in all areas of who they are. The next slide. I want to have you guys consider this for just a minute. So you go to a car wash and you pull up and you say, I want to have my car washed. And one of the things that we're always asked is essentially, how clean do you want your car? And you know, it's one of these things that we accept. Well, I mean, clean, I'm here at the car wash. Well, do you want it shiny clean or just clean? Well, shiny clean, right? I want it shiny clean. Well, do you want the inside clean as well as the outside? Well, yeah, we're here at a car wash and I'd like my car clean. You know, do you want your car to smell good? Well, of course, I don't want my clean car to not smell clean. And there's these add-ons. You go to the car wash and they add it on and they tack on, you know, additional fees. And we've definitely noticed, and the reason that we started our school is that we've noticed that education tends to be an add-on. That the whole child is an add-on, something that maybe happens on Friday afternoons at a special assembly. That used to happen during art, but that's been cut for funding. That there are these add-ons that we accept as educators and as school leaders and as, you know, parents, that we're here to say we've all got to stand up against. That it's not about adding on these special benefits of teaching our children, but rather teaching them as whole humans who've got ideas and thoughts and perspectives and views that they're bringing to us each and every day, and we've got to honor those and support those and challenge those.
All right, next slide, please. So as Christy talked about, we have decided that the whole human has to be baked in to everything that we do as an educational enterprise, as a school. So for that to be true, we really felt like school has to serve humans. There's this, oftentimes the school serves the system. It serves some other thing. It's not serving actual people who are doing actual things. So we've got our 3 pillars. We think these 3 pillars are really important if you're conceiving of an educational enterprise that serves real humans. So the first one we start from is engagement-based. We feel like learning needs to be engagement-based. What that means to us is a couple of different things. One, play is really important. We know that people learn through play. All mammals learn through play. It's the most natural way of getting information and exploring our world, testing our world, and trying counterfactuals in different scenarios. Back to Christy's original slide, this holds the emotional part, this holds the physical part, this holds the creative part where we're playing. The other thing about engagement-based learning is that relevance is really important. I often talk about stamp collecting. I'm not a stamp collector. Maybe any stamp collectors out there in the audience? No? Yes, one? Okay, so to me, stamp collecting does not seem that fun. But for someone who's into it, who's engaged by it, the fun is there. So we don't often talk about starting from fun, but we talk about starting from relevance or importance, that people care about actually figuring things out and solving problems. So for us, this idea that the people in our charge, these little humans who, as Christy said, have perspectives and wants and desires, they have to actually be engaged in what they're doing. If we want them to do any real thinking, we can't have them sit there and hope that this washes over them and that they're an empty vessel we can fill up. They have to be actively engaged in what we're doing. Next slide, please. That engagement leads us to the next part. We feel like it's really important that learning is continuous. we've gotten used to this idea of lifelong learners. People say lifelong learners. To us, that implies some idea that maybe one day after you're in college, you'll still do a crossword puzzle, or you'll maybe pick up a book. This idea that learning will continue after your graduate degree or whatever. But they're humans now, and the learning should be not confined to a desk and a specific book and a specific teacher at a specific time, but they should recognize, hey, when I'm watching a cartoon or a commercial, when I'm reading a book for fun, when I'm walking the cereal aisle at the store, when I'm at the garden, those are opportunities to learn if I have a learning mindset. So engagement leads us to this idea of continuous, because if you're someone who can find that engagement and become engaged, then you will take the opportunities to learn all the time. And again, the point here for us is that we want humans to actually use all this learning that we're doing. We want it to be something that when they go out in the world, they say, oh, this is relevant, this is useful. As a human being, I can make sense of the world around me using my learning. That leads us to our third pillar, which Ted is going to pick up for us.
Future focused. So for us, when we started this whole endeavor and we came to these three pillars, the first thing that we did is we sort of took everything off the table and we said, what is the goal of education? Something that every educator should be doing if they haven't already. What is the goal of education? Why do we ask these kids to come to our schools and sit in those desks? Hopefully not desks. What is the goal? And so for us, we arrived at this notion that the goal should be to create self-driven, autonomous, empathetic, critically thinking, meaning-creating, collaborative, communicative, thoughtful problem solvers in the world. And that's actually what got us to these three pillars. And so when we talk about future-focused, we're really talking about how then do we go about in giving them the skills to become those kinds of people in the world. And so it starts by asking the question, what are we actually sort of moving away from? And so we're moving away from enumerating your kids. How many parents do we have here tonight? Oh, that's a lot. Okay, so imagine someone you're having coffee with the girls, you're whatever, you're out at the park, you got a soccer game going on, you're talking to other parents, and somebody says, so how's Johnny doing? And you say, oh, Johnny is, let me tell you something, his math scores are through the roof. And his reading level, he's at a 5. I mean, it's amazing. His standardized test scores were a 650. He's fantastic. How many of you do that? Oh, no one. Yeah, right. Because that's not how you would describe your kid. That is not how we describe tiny humans. We talk about the things that they're interested in, that they're passionate about, the things that they're creating, the things that they're wondering about. We need to get away as an educational community from enumerating your kids and saying that is how we identify them. We identify them by their math score and their reading level and their standardized tests and how well they conform to doing homework and so on and so forth. So what are we shifting to? Well, we're shifting to, again, the ability to give them these skills. We're shifting to the hope that we can create innovators and collaborators and visionaries in the world. And by the way, when we say the word innovator, how many of you, what comes to mind is that sort of tech, the super tech nerd, and we're designing computers or jet propulsion or, special effects for films and things like that. Innovation happens across the board. Innovation can happen in food service. It can happen in addressing the issues of homelessness. It can happen in farming. It can happen across the board. So we don't need to think, well, if my kid is not really good at math and science, then they're not really becoming an innovator. That's not true. Empathy can help someone to learn to become an innovator. So that's what we're shifting to, away from numbering and sort of enumerating these kids and getting into identifying what we're trying to instill in them in terms of these future-focused skills. And so in asking the question, how did we get there? We got there because about 130 years ago, we as an educational system designed a contract. We drew up an agreement. And that agreement is between us, we the teachers, and you the students. And so our part as educators of that contract that we drew up, says that we The teachers will have the knowledge, we will have it all, we will organize it in a way that makes really no sense to you. But we'll organize it. We'll say, here's the math silo, and here's the social studies silo, and here's the language arts silo, and there's science over there. Don't collaborate. We're not gonna let those touch. It's like the food on your plate at Thanksgiving, right? Don't let it touch. I'm the opposite. I mix it all together. But we do that, and we say, so our part is to do that, and then we will design the worksheets, and we'll create the homework for you, and we'll design the tests, and we'll give the lectures, and we'll write the textbooks. That's our part of the contract. Well, the tiny humans in the system, as we talk about humanizing education, the tiny humans in the system, your job, you the student, is to come in, sit in our classrooms, line up in those desks, listen to the lectures, take the tests, do the homework, conform. Two things are sort of coming out of that system that we're seeing in droves right now in education, and that is, one, they trust us, they trust the adults, and they say, okay, I'll jump through the hoops, and they do that stuff, and then 12 years later they come out and they go, oh man, I'm not ready for this world that's requiring me to think and be empathetic and have ideas and question things and critically think. I'm not ready to solve these problems. The other thing that happens is they butt up against the system. And somewhere along the way, they go, this is not working. This is not serving me. And then we label them. We go, oh, you're not good at conformity. You know. And then those kids start to, their self-esteem drops, their confidence drops. They start to self-identify as not being smart or not capable. All the while, what we've forgotten is that they never signed the contract. They never agreed to this. It was our contract. We assumed that they would buy in. And so for us, landing on these three pillars, thinking about education as something that has to be engaging, that has to be continuous, has to be future-focused. For us, that is whole child education. As Christy pointed out, it's not something that you piece together on the side. It's not a Friday afternoon circle where you talk about your feelings. It's all day, every day. And it bleeds out of those schools, out of those classrooms, into their lives at home. And so on behalf of myself and AJ and Christy, we just want to leave you with a charge. When you walk out of this room tonight, parents, educators, everyone, start having these conversations. Ask, what is the purpose of education? What do you want for your child? Abandon what we all went through as grown adults and think about the 21st century. Is your child going to be ready? And how do we change this? And not just for ourselves. How do we change this for low socioeconomic communities across this country? How do we change it for the kids where no one's fighting for a better education? Have those conversations. Stand up. Help us revolutionize this. So thanks. Thanks for listening.
Our next speaker has been in education for 20 years. She has a master's in English and educational psychology, and she is the director for Beacon School of Boys. Please welcome Una Hansen.
Hi, good evening. Nazi, where are you? You're back, okay. Good evening, my name is Una Hansen. Thanks for coming tonight. I know this time of year is extra crazy for parents and teachers, so it means a lot that you all came here to support your kids. So a lot of the speakers tonight have talked about social emotional learning, and I love the car wash example. Because so many people have asked me as I've been on this journey in the process of starting the school, what will your social emotional component be? And, will you cover social emotional learning? And I always say, what other kind of learning is there? Other than mechanical, kind of physical, routine things, we really always need that emotional or social motivation or connection to really learn anything meaningful. And so, next slide. And so tonight, I'm going to focus on a particular group of students who I think are at risk for not having that full, deep social emotional connection, not only at home, but also at school. And this is boys. Next slide. So I'm going to focus the next few minutes on social emotional learning in boys. Now, I have a son and a daughter. I also think social emotional learning is important for girls. I do not think men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Boys and girls do not have different brains. But our research shows us that boys and girls experience the world differently, and they definitely experience school differently. And this is something that's been in my professional life now for many years. But when it got really personal was with the pediatrician a few years ago. And my son was in second grade, and he jumps up on the counter to get his exam, and the pediatrician says, "So Harris, do you ever get in trouble at school?" She's never asked my daughter this question. And I know why she asked it, because we know the vast majority of discipline referrals and other situations like that at schools that disproportionately affects boys. But it was that moment of seeing the look in his eye, like, why would I get in trouble at school? And he hasn't had that problem, but it was a very personal moment of realizing the messages that our boys are receiving about how they should be in school and kind of what their behavior is like. So how many parents have boys in the room? Right. How many people work with boys, interact with boys, either nephews, grandchildren? So if you know boys, you know that boys sometimes see the world a little bit differently. Next slide. These are twins. Anybody have twins? These are twins. I love these little guys. So I know whenever I have a rough moment, a rough day, I just pull up this slide. So I think sometimes we see boys' creativity or their exuberance or their sense of humor, and our culture writes it off as they're just kind of big dumb animals. And this is obviously very damaging to our boys, and no one's saying this directly to them, but they're hearing this from the culture. They're hearing boys will be boys. I remember when my son was born, he's my second child, everyone said, "Oh, boys are so much easier. What you see is what you get." And I know why they said that, but I also know why that's not fair to boys. And we know that when boys are not connecting to that social emotional part of themselves, that this is affecting not only their relationships, but also how they're doing in school, because we know that you have to be in touch with that social emotional piece in order to learn something meaningful. Next slide. So I want to say something radical. Boys have an inner life. It shouldn't be radical, right? But I think for a lot of us, saying it out loud is sort of radical. Boys have an inner life. In our culture, it's easy to forget that. We hear boys will be boys, snips and snails and puppy dog tails. And especially for teachers with young boys, especially those of you who work with elementary boys, a lot of boys can feel like defective girls in a school, right? And it really takes a special teacher to see beyond, the old stereotypes of the frog in the pocket. Next slide. So we know that this is hurting our boys in school. This is kind of grim, and this is from 2 years ago, but you could probably find 4 articles today online talking about what people are calling the boy crisis. And there's some debate about whether there really is a crisis, but the data can't be ignored. In fact, I think the most recent PISA scores and the analysis just came out and showed again that there's a big gap for boys in certain areas of education. So there's definitely something going on, and I think it's important that teachers and parents are aware that this could be a problem for your own son or for the boys in your class. Next slide. So there's an incredible documentary. Has anyone seen this, The Mask You Live In? Yay. An incredible documentary that helps give you a little window into what it's like to be a boy growing up in America today. I've never been a boy in America. I have one at home. But this film will really kind of take you there. And it's tough to watch. No, I'm not going to show the whole thing. I'm only going to see about a minute of the trailer. But I highly recommend that you seek out this film if you have boys in your life. It's available on wherever you stream your media, it's there. It's definitely made for adults. So before sharing it with, if you have maybe an older teenage boy or girl, view it first before you know your kid and whether they can handle it. So we're going to see just about the first 52 seconds of this trailer, and we don't have any. Might need earmuffs. There's just a few words in here in this trailer that are a little rough. But Nazi, can you get us to YouTube, please? Thank you.
Stop crying. Stop with the tears.
Don't cry.
Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotion.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't let nobody disrespect you. Be cool and be kind of a dick.
Always keep your mouth shut.
Nobody likes a tattletale.
Bros come before hoes.
Don't let your woman run your life.
You a bitch.
What a fag.
Get laid. Do something.
Be a man.
Be a man.
Grow some balls.
The three most destructive words that every man receives when he's a boy is when he's told to be a man.
We've constructed an idea of masculinity in the United States that doesn't give young boys a way to feel secure in their masculinity, so we make them go prove it all the time.
Within their peer group culture, each of them is posturing based on how the other boys are posturing, and what they end up missing is what they each really want, which is just that closeness.
You see these little boys, and over their faces you hear this sort of montage of clips of the messages that men recall being told when they were little. Primarily, be a man, man up, don't be a, I don't want to say all these words, but, and just the way that boys are taught to hide behind a mask. And it's not always safe to show their full emotional range. There's one emotion that's definitely okay for boys to show. Which one is that? Anger, right? So boys are allowed to show anger. We've told them that's okay. And so you can see why, when there's an issue in class, why these boys are getting sent to the office, getting all kinds of discipline referrals, etc. It's the one emotion they're allowed to have socially. So it can seem kind of grim. We have all these cultural messages, right? And we know we have toxic messages for girls. I think we're pretty well versed in those at this point in 2017. But I think seeing this film, even if you go home and just Google the trailer for The Mask You Live In, you'll get a taste of the kinds of toxic messages that boys are getting. And so it's up to us as parents and educators to try to create a safe space to protect the boys' authentic emotional lives, what's really in there, so they can be full human beings and also do better in school and get on that path to those jobs that don't exist yet. So I'm going to give you some summer reading. Raising Cain. Has anyone read this? Oh, great. If you read one book about boys, this is the one. There are a lot of folks out there selling books about gender that are not based on science, that are very retro, that's kind of relying on essentialist ideas about gender. Not Michael Thompson and Dan Kinlan. So Raising Cain. There's even a PBS video version of this book, but it's pretty old school, so the production quality is not great. So Raising Cain. So this is for every parent. And if teachers are interested, if they're wanting to learn more about their boys, this is a great one. Okay, next slide. Looks like it got cut off a little bit, but what it says at the top is boys as relational learners. So this goes back to something a few other speakers have mentioned, which is that our relationships really come first. And research has shown that boys are relational learners. The relationship with the teacher comes first. Two human beings. I love the tiny human. So the tiny human and the slightly larger human, in my case, only slightly larger, that comes first. And if you have a daughter, especially if you have a daughter maybe in junior high or high school, you might know that sometimes girls, not all, sometimes girls, if a teacher doesn't connect with her, she will double down and work twice as hard to win that teacher over. But most of our boys, they think the teacher doesn't like them. Why am I going to work for that guy? Or she doesn't like me. I'm not going to try. So it's really on us as educators. We have to make a special outreach to our boys. And so I love this picture of the coach with the basketball team, because I think the idea of teacher as coach versus up on the stage lecturing like I'm doing now, The teacher as coach, demonstrating, listening, working on this, being on the same team is really that model that we need. And coaches know their players, right? If your kids are involved in sports, I bet many of you feel like the coach knows your kid more than their teacher does. And a lot of that has to do with time, and it's after school, and it's more relaxed. We need to try to tap into that as educators, a little bit of that coach model in our classrooms. Next slide. So I've got homework, summer reading for the teachers too. There's a great book, actually quite a few books about relational learning. And this is the shortest one. So I think it's best for teachers who I know are pressed for time. It's called I Can Learn From You. It's a really moving book that has anecdotes from this really important research about how teachers and boys can connect. So I want to leave you with that point I made earlier about boys having an inner life, and that just remember that boys have the same emotional needs as girls. Again, kind of revolutionary, right? Boys have the same emotional needs as girls, but they just don't always have the vocabulary or the permission to express those needs. And we talked a little about empathy earlier tonight. And it's really important for boys to learn how to identify and name their emotions so that they can identify and name them in others. If you don't know how you're feeling, how do we expect them to know how someone else is feeling? Right? So we see how social emotional learning for boys affects them in their family relationships, their friendships, and of course in their classroom setting. So when you go home tonight to your son, or you see your boys in class tomorrow, even if they have pencils sticking out of their nose, I want you to remember that there's a real full human being in there that gets hurt, gets sad, gets scared, and we need to let them know that it's okay to explore all of those parts of themselves so that they can be a whole person and be a more active, engaged learner. And when we do that, when we work together as parents, teachers, coaches, mentors, then our boys are going to become the kind of courageous, compassionate, kind men that we want them to grow up to be. So, thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is the director of iLead Pacoima. He was personally chosen by Adrian Gonzalez of the Dodgers as the community hero. He was chosen by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to be a keynote ECET speaker. Please welcome Dave Trejo.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Jackson, for organizing a wonderful event that I am going to take back and guilt trip my facilitators and see if one of them will take it on, because I don't want to organize it, but it's pretty amazing. Thank you, Nazi, for hosting us. And anytime I share the stage with Janine Letford, it's always a good night, I know that, so thank you very much for that. I want to talk to you guys about something really important, air conditioning. So, when I was a kid, air conditioning, that was my holy grail. My mom would cram 5 kids into this beat-up, faded white station wagon, and who knew that white could even fade that much? She'd drop us off, and instead of I love you or have a good day, it was a kiss and air conditioning. And so we knew where she was going. She was going off to, I guess, what in modern day we would probably classify as a sweatshop. And she would sew all day, day in, day out, day in, day out, just sweating profusely, desperate to ensure that her kids would one day work in an air-conditioned office. This was her measure of success. Her dreams were pretty modest. She was too humble for audacious ambition. She didn't say, I want them to manage the office or be CEOs, simply air conditioning. So I grew up naturally shy, quiet, and compliant. So I grew up shy, quiet, and compliant, but I observed everything. I rarely ever said anything, but just watched. I was the youngest of 5, And by first grade, I'd figured something out. Parent-teacher conference night was a big deal. Depending on what the teacher said, it could lead to gifts, immense praise, even money. In my house, sometimes it led to violence. So, my father was this like volcano of a man. He was also very charming, and so my teachers never knew that their words would dictate whether or not he erupted or would remain dormant. So like I said, I was shy, quiet, and compliant. But man, did I get distracted. I watched the kids that behaved bad. They fascinated me. They didn't turn in quality schoolwork, and I just watched them, and I was like, who are you? Don't you know that your dad's gonna find out everything at parent-teacher conference night? I studied them, I tried to get in their head, I didn't understand them. And when I wasn't watching them, I was watching the kids that got good grades. I didn't want them to get better grades than me. I didn't want them to finish faster than me. I had so many academic rivals that had no idea they were my rivals, but make no mistake, they were my rivals. So, as we move forward with parent-teacher conference night, all this competing with other kids that had no idea I was competing with them, all these observations, was a lot of distractions for a kid that needed to bring home good grades. So, if it wasn't for air conditioning, I guarantee you parent-teacher conference nights would have gotten something like this. He's really intelligent when he's focused. Oh, he does a lot when he's not distracted. And my father would have only heard one part of that. Air conditioning became my own internal redirective mantra. Air conditioning, air conditioning, air conditioning. I'd watch and I'd see that kid and he was just doodling. He wasn't paying attention and I'd want to shout out, who are you? What are you doing? But air conditioning, air conditioning, air conditioning. And then I'd watch her and she would turn in the quiz faster than me. And I'd think, you're cheating, huh? Do you know all the answers? Are you guessing? Maybe she's a genius. Maybe she's a genius and I will never be the smartest kid in this class. Air conditioning, air conditioning, air conditioning. Air conditioning led to many successful parent conferences through my career in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then came third grade. And I know where your brain jumps, like this is where he gets his butt whooped, right? But on third grade, all 5 siblings had parent-teacher conference night the same night, and mine was last. So mom and dad sit beside me, and there's Miss DeFrancesco. So you should know something about Miss DeFrancesco. At 8 years old, I was certain of only one thing, well, maybe 2 things. One, that Miss DeFrancesco was the most beautiful thing that ever walked the earth, and 2, that I was gonna marry her. These things were certain. And so Miss DeFrancesco goes over my report card, and she tells my parents that in her short career, never had she been so impressed that she had already spoken with the principal to consider skipping me a grade. That would have put me in the same grade as my brother and terrified me because he was awesome at home. At school, he was my biggest bully. Did not want to be in his grade. But my Miss DeFrancesco tells my parents, so I give Dave writing assignments before I give them to everyone else. So that when he turns them in, then I can assign it to everyone else and his hangs on the wall as the exemplar. So my father was filled with pride. All the other siblings were happy, not because they were proud of me, but because they got get-out-of-jail-free cards. Didn't matter what was said in their conference anymore because my father was so filled with pride. So he takes us all home in the windowless, seatless van with no air conditioning, and we go through the KFC drive-thru. Orders a bucket of chicken, and I get to pick the sides. At home, my family ate together, laughed together, was just genuinely happy together. And so as I observe this rare phenomenon, it dawns on me. I made this happen. I had done so well academically that not only was I spared violence, but my whole family was happy. From that moment on, air conditioning was so deeply ingrained that I rarely ever had to utter the phrase externally or internally. It was just there. Long after my father left and my mom struggled to raise 5 of us by herself, it got me through middle school, high school, it got me through USC, and eventually I became a PE teacher. So much for air conditioning. As my career evolved and I got better at being a teacher and I figured out that relationships were the key, my relationships with my students, or my babies as I still refer to them, because it doesn't matter whether they're this big or this big, they're my babies and they know it. As my relationship with them got deeper and stronger, I became obsessed with helping them find their why. I needed them to tap into their own version of air conditioning. I wanted grit to be second nature, and I wanted nothing to stop them from ensuring that their achievements were worthy of the sacrifices made on their behalf. Through my work, I was fortunate enough to get invited, like Jackson said, to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that's a whole story in and of itself, but that's for another day. I got to hang out with Melinda for a bit. Talk goes on YouTube, and job offers start coming in. It's crazy. School dean, school principal, consultant. I got offered to open my own school. And I never imagined that I would leave my babies before they graduated, but here I was, and there's all these life-altering opportunities, and I'm stressed the heck out. And so I started thinking, how would I advise them if they came to me with the same situation? And I realized that I was going to have to capitalize on the opportunity of a lifetime in the lifetime of the opportunity. So it's been more than 3 years now since I told my babies that I was leaving them and I wasn't going to finish the school year with them. Because the school that I was going to open was less than 5 miles away from that current school, and out of gratitude for the organization I was working with, I didn't tell them what I was going to do or where I was going to be. I just said, you'll figure it out, and when you figure it out, it'll make sense. So on my last day there, I got over 200 letters and gifts that I still keep in this big, like, orange Home Depot bucket at home, so that when my bucket is pretty depleted, like my internal bucket, I go into that and I recharge myself. They have no idea how powerful they are still to me. But what I remember most about that day is what one of my babies asked me. He said, Mr. Trejo, I know you're not going to tell us where you're going, but can I ask you 2 questions? Sure. Where you are going, will you have an office? I hadn't thought about it, but yes, I will. Will it have air conditioning? Yes. Yes, it will. And he says, well, then I get it. And I'm proud of you, we're proud of you, and I'm sure your mom was proud of you. So what I want to leave you with is just words. If you have any doubt that your words matter or that they stick, know that it's been 27 years since that parent-teacher conference. And Ms. DeFrancesco's words still have an impact not only on me, but my school community. Because I stand here as the leader of a school where every single one of my amazing teachers meets with every single one of their students' families to celebrate them. And I don't know where you are, Ms. DeFrancesco, but I do want to say thank you for making sure that this little boy never lost his connection to air conditioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We have one more speaker left tonight. He's somebody who I've known personally for several years. And so I wanted to tell a story about him before I invite him to the stage. Oh, yeah, I just saw him go like this. He's uncomfortable already. So my hair used to be much longer. Used to be down to my shoulders, and my dad hated it. And actually, I got a mullet one time, and I wore a hood, and It was awful. But I played really loud music in the garage, and if you heard it, you probably wouldn't consider it music. Literally screaming, guitars distorted, as loud as they can go, profane lyrics, it's not stuff you'd want your kids to be invited to. And I was part of a church congregation where we were looking for ways to fundraise for a trip we were going to go on over the summer to help repair Indian reservations. And so I said, well, my band wants to play shows. Could we throw a show at the church? And they said, yeah, of course. And it's kind of unbeknownst to me at this time of how much was known to Pastor Stephen of what kind of music we played or what would be going on, but he was so inviting and so open about it. And we went about it like we would any other show. And so lots of flyers were made. It was like the talk of our high school. And, eventually word gets out, and we're young, and we're adolescents, and we're reckless. And some flyers come out with some very profane language on it. And so I'm setting up this event with my friend Chaz. And I'm sitting in English class one day, and I get a text from Chaz. And he's like, dude, we're busted. Pastor Steve just texted me. He wants to meet us at Starbucks tonight. This is the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. I'm like, dude, I've only talked to Pastor Steve 3 times. Why does he want to meet at Starbucks? He says it's about the flyer. So I'm not going to repeat what was on this flyer because it was extremely inappropriate. But I think I told my parents yeah, I wanted to go learn more about the Bible, so we're going to Starbucks tonight. So my dad's here, by the way. And so, they drop us off at Starbucks, and I meet up with Pastor Steve, and he's sitting there with this flyer. And he's just got the most inviting look on his face. It's so ironic. And he just kind of looks at us, and he looks down at the flyer, and he's like, so what do you guys got to say about this? And we just look at each other well, we didn't make it. and instead of yelling at us, and instead of telling us about how wrong it was and how we were representing his community so poorly, he told us that he understood why something like this would happen, but that didn't make it acceptable. And he didn't call off the show. He listened to the music, and he said, okay, boys, I didn't really know it was going to be like this, but I'm okay with this, but we still need to represent ourselves in a way that is respectable to us and our community. And that's something that always left a lasting impact on me, that I always try to take home to my learners, is that instead of, trying to correct them and telling them that they're wrong and telling that they're parents of things they need to change, finding those parts of them that might be inconvenient, but we can still grow to make them a better person. So I want to thank Pastor Steve for that experience, which has helped me become a better educator, and please give him a warm welcome.
And he hadn't changed much. I'd forgotten about that. That's been some time ago. I want y'all to know that I've kind of been sitting in the back, because most of the time in places like this I have to sit up front and everybody can watch what I can do. So I like being in the back, and I've enjoyed hearing the speakers. And I've been kind of amazed how close in ethos all of the speakers are, the care that goes into it. I want to see a pine cone with a pencil up its nose, and that would be me. I think that's a fair representation at this point. But I want to talk to y'all about something that's kind of an odd thing. I don't think people think of it much, but I want to talk to y'all about spirituality. Odd for me to say, huh? I had an experience quite a few years ago. I was a staff therapist in a counseling center in Redlands. And I had just finished with my first client. It was 10:45 something. And you had to go out and down the steps to the restroom. So I go out and down the steps to the restroom, and I'm there, and it's a swinging door that doesn't shut all that great, but it's okay. And so I'm standing there, and, I hear women's voices. And they're standing right, outside the door. And I like a little privacy. Sometimes things don't work if there's too many people around. So, So I'd get all finished and I walk out, and it's the secretary for the counseling center, another therapist. And the secretary says, "Stephen, we need you to go to the school next door." And I said, "What's the deal?" And said, "There's been a shooting over there, and they need therapists over there now." And it's like my mind so quickly went to all of the reasons why I should not do this. And I'm slipping into crisis counseling. What I learned about crisis, come on, pull it up, let's go. And so I said, okay. So I started walking that way, and I got to the sidewalk and around to the playground, turned the corner, and I heard, "Stop, don't move." And here is a policeman with his hand on his gun, pointing at me. And I'm thinking, the day's not getting any better right now. And so he got on his walkie-talkie, and they got a hold of the administrator and said, "Yeah, we've asked him to come over here." And so the next thing I know, I'm in a room of third graders. And they're up against the wall because there's windows, and they don't know how many people are involved or what's going on. And I'm looking down at all of these faces. And you talk about inadequate. It doesn't even come close. It's, what am I doing here? And so I just go sit down and I say, "What's going on?" And they start telling me the story. And we start doing the story over again. So, but we're okay, right? Your teachers are here. We've got people around us. We're okay, right? We're good. Yeah. And we just told the story until the story was told out. And about that time, the police came, and the parents. This was a private school. I'm 61. I can't tell this without crying because it was so powerful to me. The parents, there are how many news trucks around the perimeter of the school? The parents formed a human chain so that they protected their kids. No reporters, no nothing. And we were allowed to go in and to do our job. And so I came out, the next thing I had was a young man who had been kicked out of school, came in with a rifle and shot the principal in the face. There were 2 5-year-olds in there from kindergarten, and they saw it happen. And so I come out, I talk to the church secretary next and spend some time with her. Then I get the 2 5-year-olds and their parents. At this point, I think my oldest daughter is like 2. And all I can think about is, what kind of trauma do we have here? How horrible is this for these parents? And so I sit down at these, those little 2 small like chairs and tables and stuff. You try to fold up under them. And so I'm sitting there with the 2 little girls, and we're just talking. And after a while, I'm running out of stuff, because I'm trying to do what I can. But after a while, you just feel like you kind of done everything you can do. And the one little girl kind of looked at me and said, "Can we go?" And I said, "Are y'all doing okay?" "Yeah." And I looked at the parents, and the parents were watching to see because they're scared to death. And the other girl looked and said, I think we may go to McDonald's. Do you want to go to McDonald's with us? Yeah. End of story. End of story. What was it about that? What is it about that normalized trauma and stopped it in its tracks? And I'm not saying that there weren't nightmares about it. I'm not saying we were on the campus for like 4 or 5 more days, by the way, talking with a lot of people. But what stopped everything there? And I can say straight up front, it was the power of those 2 girls' spirits that taught me and took care of me. Now, what do I mean by spirit? When I go back to Arkansas and I talk with my best friend, we talk about spirit, he talks about woo-woo. So spirit is defined as woo-woo. If it's major spirit, it's big woo. If it's not a big spirit, it's just woo, okay? So that's the way it works here. What do I mean by spirit? Well, I have a model for that. And I use it anecdotally as a tool, and that's very, very simple. We're basically comprised of systems, and if we break it down to the most simple thing, we're comprised of our intellect. That is, how do we know what we know? It's our knowledge base. Then we're also comprised of our emotions and our intuition. And then we're embodied. We have these 3 things. And if we look at those 3 things and we see that they are connected with each other, that means that our spirit is not truncated. Does that make sense to you? The pieces parts are hanging together, and that's a big deal. Other thing about this is you can look at people that you know probably. You may even look at yourself. I mean, I've used this model for myself, and it's been uncomfortable at times. I get too into my head. I'm kind of a heady guy. I get into my head too much. And I say, okay, well, what are my feelings doing? How do I feel about this? You know, what is my intuition, that part of me that takes the wisdom of my intellect and the feeling that I have, that I've learned from being in the culture that shows me a reality that's dependable. You know, what is it about this thing that helps me understand? So I can see very quickly, I need to invest a little bit more in another aspect of myself. Obviously, when you get older, you kind of need to take care of the body a little bit better, you know? It's one of those things. I look at holistic education as helping kids to understand the power of their spirits. When they are careful with their emotions, when they know and they're not afraid of their emotions, when they're intellectually curious and have that power of insight, when they get it, you can talk to them and you can see their feet start tapping, or you can see that movement start to go. You know there has been an integration formed. And that integration means their spirit is strong. It is holding together. And that's when I say this is an act then of integrity. This child has integrity. Now, clinically, I can use that. I worked in Redlands for a long time. I worked with a group called Family Services Association. Some of y'all may be familiar with them. And they had a thing called the Home Again Project. And the Home Again Project took homeless families and tried to stabilize them and get them into housing and teach them how to use a checkbook. And I ran a group for homeless men with addiction issues. And all of those men were intensely proud of their children. And they were all disappointed with the way that they were treating them. And we could take some time and trace, okay, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? You know, are you getting out? Are you feeling yourself move? Are you doing all these things? Can you locate in you where the issues are? And then we found there's a little dynamic going to it, and it's a very simple dynamic. because all of this, honestly, is about intimacy. Intimacy is the center of spirituality. Don't you love to see kids who have gained some intimacy with the things that feed their passions? And all of a sudden they're loving to tell everybody all of the pieces, parts of this thing they have in front of them. It's just killer good. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It's just wonderful. But what you have is the aspects of relationship. And what I found is this: if you have respect, if you have honesty, then you can form a type of safety. That's what happened to those two little girls. And when you do that, you can actually start the initial movement out of safety to create trust. And as you do that, you can deepen it. And because you're acting on that, you actually are willing then to become vulnerable with who you are. The vulnerability of men and boys, you know. Then all of a sudden, you find yourself having relationships of depth. And I don't think human existence gets any better than that myself. So what I would like to leave you with is just this. Just take a moment. Think about where you are intellectually. Think about what you're doing with your body, how you're using it to feel what is, and interface with the environment around you. Consider your emotions. And then the hardest part for me is, have I done something that didn't respect me? Yet again. How honest am I about my willingness to call myself on that? How safe am I when I neither respect nor am honest with myself? What it does is it gives me a tool for restoration. It gives me a tool to bring my spirit back into balance and reintegrate and to regain my integrity. All of these things fit together in real live humans. Our children, for some reason, tend to teach us that. There is not a bigger butt whooping on the face of the earth than to be a parent. It is the most miserable, wonderful butt whooping in the world, you know? And I have to say, you don't become a parent. You're taught how to be a parent if you pay attention. And your children will teach you how to become human as you are allowing them to grow. So that's my 5 or 6 insights for y'all. Thank you for asking me here.
Mr. Bagwell had a professional emergency tonight, so that will conclude the evening. I wanted to say thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you so much for our speakers for being here. Please give them another round of applause. And thanks to so much iLeads Encino staff for being here tonight as well. So have a wonderful evening. Take care. Thank you. Bye.